Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend, I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about making friends with your LMS. This webinar will be recorded. We'll send a copy of the webinar out to everyone who has registered in an email later today. We'll also get this posted on our blog on our website a little later in the week. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer those questions in the questions panel, so please do use that questions panel. We'll be trying to bring up those questions to our guest, Sam, and we'll also be trying to answer questions on that back channel if we can. We're going to be taking advantage of the show of hands tool here in GoToWebinar. So if I can get everybody to click that show of hands button right now, just to make sure that you're finding it now and not trying to find it later. I'm seeing that 55% of you have found that. That's probably a good number. I'll go ahead and put your hands down here. And so as I mentioned, we have Sam Rogers of Snap Synapse with us today. And Sam, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more a little later on. But Sam is going to be talking to us all about LMSs, and it's going to be really exciting. Just so you know, one last piece of business. One of the things we like to do after the fact is try to follow up and make sure everybody's questions were answered, give clarification one-on-one if needs be. So do be aware of that. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Sam.
All right, thanks. Pleasure to be here. Yes, we're talking today about making friends with your LMS. And showing screen, yes, yes.
Yep, we see it, looks great.
Great. So when you think about your friends, these are people that are not perfect, right? You don't want to be friends with the perfect people. You want to be friends with the people that have common interests with, common goals, shared history, all that kind of stuff. But there's probably some certain things that you just don't bring up. You know, maybe religious or political views, maybe family stuff, maybe just that one time in Vegas, whatever it is. We know that we can still be friends even though we're dealing with people that aren't perfect. Such is the way with your LMS. And today we'll be talking about not only the, sorry, one slide too many, not only the friends that you have with your LMS, making friends with you and your LMS, but also with content. So the things that you make, how those get hosted in your LMS, making sure that they are friendly together. And as you can see, there are a few different ways that we can look at an LMS. And of course, your vendor sees it as LMS, as something that's powerful and strong and does everything that you would ever need it to do, right? And you can, if this is how you see your LMS, feel free to agree. And then there's how the business generally sees the LMS. We just need to get people like done. We just need them to be compliant. That just do that. Then there's like how the managers generally see the LMS, which is confusing sometimes. There's lots of things happening that go places. It's great when it works. And then content developers, such as, I'm hoping there's a few of you out there who make things that go onto your LMS. And generally there are some shrieks of terror when we start to talk about LMS, or at least disappointment, because it's not perfect. And if this is how you see your LMS, feel free to raise some hands here too.
We had maybe 1 or 2% on all of the other ones, but we've jumped to 20% with how the content developer views it.
Yeah, I figured that's probably more the audience that we're speaking to here. This is where I am too as a senior instructional designer often. So then there's the learners, really the most important people who, meh, it's an LMS, whatever, they don't even need to know. Like it's just the thing that's in between them and what they need to do, the thing that gets them in trouble when they don't do the thing that they're supposed to do. This is, if the learners see it at all, pretty much they don't care.
And another 4% of our audience is in the meh.
Yeah, meh. Well, thank you for showing up for today's webinar about meh. How the LMS really is. There's nothing magic to it. It's not mean. It's not angry at you. It's not even really that smart. It's not even really that interesting. It's just a correlational database that stores a bunch of information. It's kind of boring. And that's okay. We might still be friends with, some people who they're not like the most exciting people. But they're people that we work with, they're people that, we're related to, they're people that we can still be friends with. The LMS really is just a way of getting people from where they are now to where they need to go. And not just learners, but also, of course, the reports that come out of an LMS, all of the management, the business needs. Who am I telling you about all of this stuff? As I mentioned, I'm a senior instructional designer. I've done some work for some companies you may have heard of. I'm also an LMS implementation specialist, and I've been doing that for 15, 20 years almost, with a lot of different providers in a lot of different situations, including some homegrown LMSs and things like that. Fortunately, LMSs have evolved a bit since earlier models, such as this, but we still probably haven't evolved our views as much about how it is to use what we have. I won't be trying to sell you any LMSs or even recommending any specific platforms. I'm sure Andrew will tell you a little about some things that there may be offered at the end, but they're not learning management systems. I'm here to tell you more about how to work with what it is that you have. If you're evaluating a new one, how to make that evaluation. And we're going to focus mostly on learning the top 5 most common LMS mistakes, specifically for content that I often see. And there will also, as promised at the end of this presentation, be plenty of room for you to complain about your LMS, which is, I know, something that many of us love to just get together and commiserate about. But we don't just need to, be negative about it. There'll be room for your bright ideas, ways that things could get better. The more that we share in the chat here or just as a community, the better it is that we can solve problems, look at things new ways. So there'll be plenty of room for stuff like that in the Q&A. And also, speaking of questions, if you have any at any time, feel free to just throw them into the chat, because we can come back to them later. Just go ahead and type it in while you see it, and then we can circle back at the end. Also, if you happen to be watching this recording, say on YouTube or wherever it is that you're watching, feel free to just tweet to @SnapSynapse. I'll get back to you probably in a day or so with answers to whatever questions that you have. So now to the meat of the presentation. What if your LMS was just as good as every other one? And what if the way that it was implemented at the beginning maybe wasn't the ideal way? What if you've learned some things since then, or your organization has figured out how to do some things, or maybe needs have changed since it was first launched, that mean that it can't deliver everything everybody wants, but that it can actually do what you need it to do? So on screen here are 2 different instruments, and they're pretty different instruments, right? But if I asked, can you play Happy Birthday on either of these instruments, you'd probably be able to ding, 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 pick out some notes, go, play a little bit of the song, get the real needs met here. But the interface on the left, you'll notice that there's a lot more keys on it, but it's much more analog kind of experience. You could say graceful, minimalistic. Maybe your LMS is more on that end of the spectrum. Not a whole lot to it, but it does what it does really well. And then there's the one on the right, which you can still pick out notes. You can still get done what you need to get done, but it's also got like way more stuff on it, right? Like lots of switches, lots of dials, lots of things that could make those notes actually make completely different sounds that are not the one you're looking for. Maybe your LMS is more like this. It's got so many features and slices and dices and makes French fries in 33 different shapes, but how do I just get it to play Happy Birthday again? Very common problem for complex systems. How do we get it to just be simple when we need it to be simple, and to scale it to complexity when we need complexity? Of all the buttons that are on that interface on the right, you might just need a few different settings to go between. So how do you know which settings you need? Well, what kind of song are you playing? What kind of music are you making? Well, what is a learning management system for anyway? We can look at what it's for in general, the famous Wikipedia page, administration, documentation, tracking, reporting, delivery. Andrew, I think there's a poll that you can put up here. Quick. Thanks. What is it that's the most important of these things for your LMS? And really, we're talking about something that's for your organization, because I'm guessing it's going to be pretty different for different people on this call, on this webinar. Some places, the tracking is going to be way more important. For some places, you're really just looking for a delivery system. There's no wrong answer here, but your answer really helps me to further direct this presentation. So
as you guys are still taking the poll, I'm seeing that some early results are definitely showing a higher number of delivery and tracking.
Great.
Not a whole lot of administration, documentation, or reporting. Looking, it's still open, you guys are still voting, but it doesn't look like that's changing. It's very, very consistent that way.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and as we would expect, right? We look at a learning management system as a way of getting information out to the learner, right? And if we can track things along the way to just tell, hey, was there some engagement or something? Can we show that? Yeah, great, we can do that. But who really needs all the administration and the documentation part and everything?
So here's those final results. 39% said delivery, 32% said tracking, 15% agreed on reporting, and 8% and 7% said administration and documentation, respectively.
Great. Thanks so much for your answers. Well, what if your LMS wasn't about the distributing part? And stick with me here. I know 39% of you just said it was, but what if it was actually a system designed for restricting access to content? This is a different way of looking at your LMS. But it is really designed to be more of an audit system for learning than it is a distribution system for learning. If you wanted to just distribute stuff, you could put it on your corporate intranet, right? You could, if you just wanted people to be able to receive the online course, the video, the job aid, whatever it is that you got, you have a way of distributing knowledge already. That tracking piece of being able to tell who got what, okay, we can still tell stuff like that, even with just a content management system, as opposed to a learning management system. Just to reframe this a little bit, what the learning management system helps us do by restricting access is make sure that this person saw the prerequisite and completed it before they got the next thing. They took this training, they were interested in that training, now we want to give them this training. And we can run reports that help us do that. When we're looking at what your LMS is for, who is it serving, is a very important thing to look at here. So we've got maybe for a particular piece of content, our target audience for that content. But then we've got other people that could receive that content. Or do we want to make sure that the content that we make is sensitive? This is only for managers and above. It's not for the general employees. We don't want employees taking that. We only want managers taking that. Well, how How are we going to zero in on that? And is that really true? What about someone who wants to become a manager? How are we going to deliver them that training, but not just let all of the employees see how they're being managed? Like, these are not technical questions. These are really conceptual questions about what is the LMS for? What is it designed to do? How should it restrict content, as opposed to how should it distribute content? What we're really talking about here is that first of the 5 issues of scope. What is your LMS for? And what is your LMS not for? It's critical that we know this in order to define success. What is success for our learning management system? What is success for content that's on our learning management system? How do we know when it worked? Feel free to throw some things in the chat here. If this content was a total success as delivered through our LMS, we know what would happen, right? I hope so. If the LMS itself was a total success, what would happen? How would we know that? We may be more accustomed to looking at that in terms of content, but remember, all of your content is coming through the LMS to people, and they may not be as aware of it as an interface. Hopefully not. It's just the thing in between them and where they need to go, right?
So some of these responses are coming in.
Great.
One says it's user-friendly. Another says it delivered the content to the correct user. Another says
Great.
Staff behaviors change. Courses are auto-assigned by role.
Okay.
Easy for the learner to learn how to use. Okay.
Great.
Documentation was accurate. Users
Accuracy.
find and navigate their own learning journeys. Empower the learner. That's a great one. Learning is retained. A lot of these are the same principles that dictate whether a course is good as well.
Yeah. Well, we're speaking, of course, with a lot of people who make courses. So it's very easy to think that way. And if we look at, say, what makes a course successful, we don't want the course that people are going to be so engaged in that they fall asleep, right? And we want something that's actually measuring, has some kind of behavioral measure, right? There's less people setting themselves on fire since we released the training than before we had it. So, safety, yay. We also have this to deal with. Maybe you're familiar with some cats and kittens like these. The learning management system can't help problems like this, really. It can only, if it doesn't do its job well, mess up problems like this further by making it more difficult for people to access training. So thanks to some of your questions out there, some of those comments about what's defining success, usability, absolutely being a big one. It's just mandatory. Why should I be here? It's just mandatory for everybody. I don't need to be here. Your learning management system can track, of course, who isn't there or who is maybe supposed to do something, say if it has been assigned by a job role or something like that. Assuming that you have an accurate data feed and that job roles have been tied to learning, which I have yet to see actually in any organizations that I've worked with, but we have content that we're making. We want to get that content to people. The learning management system is just the thing in the way. It's not about engagement with an LMS. It's about getting the LMS out of the way as much as possible so that they can be engaged by content when we're talking about the learner. But when we're talking about the LMS, we're really talking about something for the business. We're really talking about what is important within the organization that you work for. What is that most important metric that your LMS is going to be judged by? Is it so good at reporting that no one can get the meaningful information out of it? Well, what do you mean that they've completed, but they're still on the list of things that they need to complete? This doesn't make any sense to me. Very easy to accidentally make reports like that. what is that most important metric? And go ahead and, if you want to throw something in the chat too, not divulging any internal company information, but what's that thing that your LMS is really designed to do that the business cares about? That getting the X to the check, you know, for management.
Well, while they're working out the response there, we did have a question here that says, how can we make mandatory training relevant to those who are forced into using an LMS?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and it's a great design question for the learning that you're designing. The mandatory part, you know, back to that slide of all the different audiences that we're serving, very rarely is something ever mandatory to everyone. It depends on the learners that you have in your system, but even if it's something that's mandatory for all employees, but you're serving maybe some vendors or partners or external customers that you're tracking through your LMS, things like that, very common situation. Just because people say everyone has to take this, learn to hear the little asterisk in their voice when they say that, because it's almost never actually everyone. It's a targeted group of everyone. It's the everyone that they're talking about. So the more that we can dial into who it is that we're talking about, the easier it is to make it relevant to that group and not try and please everybody, but to zero in on the people that really need this information.
Now, coming back to the what's the most important metric?
Yes.
Comment. Here's a general understanding of what they're saying. A kind of an overview here. So compliance report. It needs to report attendance on certain courses, progress within the course on a weekly basis, number of hours spent on the course, learner satisfaction. Another one here is I send reports to our VPs of attendees, and they contact those who haven't attended. Registrations tend to skyrocket within the hour after I've sent a report.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Another one says offers bite-sized learning modules. Measurable change in behavior is another one.
Okay. Well, there's a few things in there which are still kind of content focused, measuring attendance. Certainly for regulatory compliance purposes, you got to track that. And the LMS does that. That's not the challenging part. What I'm specifically asking here for the most important metric is, what is it that your business actually needs? When people are attending training, no one's making any money. No one's doing billable work. What is it that your business is measuring that they got an LMS to do? It's more than just track regulatory compliance, hopefully. If that's all you need, there's way simpler ways to do it than bringing a learning management system into the picture. There's probably some other stuff that your business is looking at that justified the expense of a learning management system. And it's worth it to keep asking that question. As content developers, it's not necessarily the thing that's the most obvious, or the thing that people are going to lead with when they're introducing a project to you. But before any project is created, before there's a request for a course, someone has measured something and determined that it is not how it should be. There is a measurement somewhere. Maybe they hid it. It wasn't part of, you know, the inbox message that said do this now. But there is a measurement somewhere. That's the part that I'm focusing on here, because once we know that, we can start to drill into a quick, easy, simple way to test that we can actually do that we can actually affect that metric. So earlier it was said, you know, making sure that people can see the content. Great. Making sure that the people who aren't supposed to see the content don't see the content, such as in that managers and above example. We want to restrict access. We want to make sure that only the people that took new employee orientation then take customer information security or harassment prevention, or, you know, if you have things in a sequence like that, that they're getting that in that proper sequence. Getting reports to the people who need them and who can understand them, such as, yeah, copying that report to the vice president. That's a great thing. So is it saying what that vice president actually thinks it's saying? It's very easy to report on things in the learning management system, which are, yes, information, but are they information that helps that person who's in power make a decision based on that information? That's really the only reason we want to know anything. I actually wrote a blog post on this recently for e-learning industry. Why measure training at all? The only reason is because we're going to make a decision about how to make that thing better, or if we should continue doing it, content-wise. And for learners, this person has not taken any of their compliance training. They still haven't taken any of their compliance. They're not compliant. They're not taking their training. Somebody needs to sit down and have a talk with this person who's avoiding all of the training, because they become a liability to the organization, right? There's decisions that are being made here. So compliance goal, can that be met? Behavior goal, can that be measured? Well, what is the simplest, easiest way to test that we can meet our compliance goal? Does your organization really have 100% compliance on that customer information security course? I'm betting not. There's some number that works for your organization that is less than 100%. It's less than every single person. You know why? Because somebody's on maternity leave. Somebody's sick. Somebody hasn't done it because they couldn't get into the system, or they just thought maybe no one would notice. Like, we want to target those people, and we want to give them reminders and give them the support that they need to take what they need to take. But it's not 100%, and it probably won't be. So what number is that in your organization? What's the simplest, easiest way to test that? Well, one way is just to offer a checkbox and make it part of a rollout of, we need everybody to go in and check this box in the learning management system. An attestation of some sort. It could be linked to a regulatory compliance thing. Don't just do something for no reason, but something that allows you to gauge what it is that compliance actually looks like, and working with the compliance or audit team within your organization. That's maybe not who the content developers are working with all the time. There's great assumptions that we can test. And as we're doing that, you know, as I mentioned, it's not going to be 100%. So what are the odds that without identifying what compliance looks like, we'll be able to hit it? If we don't even look at what does compliance mean, how likely are we to achieve compliance within the acceptable parameters at our organization? Probably not so good. Like, it's much easier to hit a target when you know what the target is. So that's the moral of the story about scope, which is really the most important thing. What is your LMS designed to do? What is it not designed to do? And now, moving on to selection of features. Of those things that are most important, why do we have anything else? It's worth evaluating, even for the LMS that you have right now. Likely when your LMS rolled out, it had all sorts of bells and whistles and features and functions that the vendor, you know, said, oh, well, you should do this. This'll be great for all your folks. Maybe, but back to that usability part, it's much easier for you as a content developer to use. It's much easier for your learners who are experiencing content through your LMS to use if there's fewer things in the way. Things that might be marginally valuable, but they're not those critical things that the business really needs to focus on. And as for my how could we find out? Well, you can actually turn things off. There are features and functions in your learning management system, no matter which ones you have, which are optional. They're not core platform. So might it be worth testing how much of a difference it would make if certain features and functions that are difficult to support, that cause confusion for your target audience, that make reporting more complicated than it needs to be, can you keep it simple? Can you keep your content simple as well, so that it's communicating only what it needs to your LMS, and not a bunch of extra data, which maybe we might use someday? There's an argument to be made for that, but realize that you're complicating reporting immensely when you do that. So we'll talk a little bit about different ways that content reports to the learning management system, nothing in detail, but how simple can you make it? How predictable and systematized can the experience of content be within your LMS? Always keep looking for the simplest way possible, and have the courage to stand up and say, this could be simpler. We could make a better user experience here. A better user experience for the people looking at the reports. That has a lot of payoff. A better experience for the learners. Even more payoff. How can we optimize our content? Now, I'm not suggesting you just randomly start flipping switches and turn things off. Have some strategy around it, and don't do everything at once. But as you switch things off, as you test, maybe at a low volume training time, there's two pieces of feedback that you will want to listen to. Anyone who's in your target audience, if they complain, that's a big clue that you hit the wrong switch. And anyone who can pull the plug on the LMS or your team or you, that's a really good person to listen to as well. These are generally the people who are, getting the reports, who are making evaluative decisions with the information that is being gathered by the learning management system. So those are great voices to hear. And everyone else isn't critical by definition. Now, this is a little ruffles a few feathers when I say things like this. But any software developers in the audience who've tuned in can probably identify with this. Being able to streamline to the voices that matter means that you can better serve them. It means that you can give them what they really need, and you're not complicating everything in the administration. So all of those setup pieces can just be simple. Moving on to that third part of setup. What kinds of values does your content pass to the LMS? Now, probably you have some kind of standards document within your organization, or something that you at least hand out to software vendors that may be helping you develop content. Something that maybe you use to evaluate new templates from eLearning Brothers, or however it is that you're looking at content. What is it that it's being passed to your LMS? And then once your LMS gets that, what records does it keep? I'll illustrate this just a minute in the next slide. And lastly, what's the content that's going to make the most difference to that organization? Back to that target metric. What are the reports that need to come out of the LMS? Of course, we're going to be able to report on this person went in, this person did this. Hopefully, we'll be able to report on these people still need to do that, things of that nature. Back to that values thing. I hope that this isn't brand new news to anyone, but I rarely hear it talked about. It might be. Hopefully you know that these things are different, right? Even with a SCORM 1.2 compliant online course package. Also with AICC, also with SCORM 2004, it gets more complicated, and with XAPI, it gets more complicated too. But pass and fail, and the score, and the completion are three entirely separate fields. And if your content is passing that to an LMS, is it doing it consistently? Is it doing it consistently not just within your course, but across courses some of which may be provided by external partners or vendors or things like that? Is there a standard that your content is passing good information to the LMS. You're probably familiar with the expression of garbage in, garbage out. What is it that you're giving your LMS? When someone answers a question, does the LMS even know that they answered that question? Does it know that they selected the correct option here? Does it know that they selected A? Of course, your course knows. The course is giving them this experience. Oh, you got the right answer. Great. The course is telling them you scored 100%. That's great. The course tells them it was a passing score. But the LMS, even if all of this is working perfectly in the course side, the LMS may interpret these results differently. And this is where a lot of people get mad and confused and think the LMS is out to get them. It's not out to get you. It's just looking to take the information that the courses, the online learning experiences of every learning object type, the information that the learners are creating that's getting passed to the learning management system. What does the learning management system do with that? So it's different for different systems, and sometimes it's more configurable than others. If you have something that's set to pass and incomplete, there are no negative records that will be stored in your LMS, and that's probably a good way to go. For most courses, that's great. But if you want the LMS to track that someone actually failed something so that you can direct them to other support or other learning, or so that it shows up on a report that they failed, then you're tracking negative records in the LMS. And how your LMS handles that is very unique to your LMS. But this isn't a technical part. This is just a basic conceptual idea. What do you want your LMS to track? And how is it going to report that? And it is entirely possible that even very well-meaning content can, accidentally report that someone is in progress, they failed, and they have 100%. Hopefully you've never run into that situation. I ran into it actually just yesterday with content from one of my clients. It's not the fault of your content template when that happens. It's how the content is configured to pass values to the learning management system, and what the learning management system is designed to do when it gets that. So the variable threshold of evaluating, oh, they got 80%, they passed, or 75%, whatever, they passed. Where is that being evaluated? Is that something that's being evaluated in your content or in your learning management system? If it's both, there's room for problems. Pick one. And if you make a mistake, or there's lots of reasons, the content may change, you'll want to swap content out at some point. You'll want to switch this course for this other learning object. How does that happen in your LMS? That's a process to get very, very familiar with. What does that version update look like if it's the same learning object type? What does it look like if it's a different learning object type? What does it look like when you're switching it out in a curriculum and the version of the curriculum that they got into in the first place? What's the learner experience of the content? You know, oh, well, I was 80% done with this curriculum yesterday, and today I'm 60% done. What gives? Oh, well, we updated that course, and now you need to take it over. Remember that you've got learners on the other end who are going, this thing's broken. It just said 80% yesterday, and now it says 60. Well, they still have the right record in their transcript. It's still true, but it's not well communicated to the learner. So when you're making changes and swapping things out, getting very familiar with what the learning experience is critical. And the other important part, how is this supposed to show up on reports? What does it look like to the people who are looking at the report of that learning path, program, curriculum, whatever? When they see that someone is halfway done, what do they see on that report? What are they looking at to make that evaluation? What does it mean? And how is it going to be displayed in a way that's very clear to them? We can get into the technical elements of how that's delivered, but first and foremost, what does that actual report look like that they look at when someone is 100% done and there's been a change? What does it look like when they're 50% done and there's been a change? How do we tell in our reporting? Anyone run into problems like this in your work? We know that things will change. We know that there are more changes coming due to all sorts of reasons. It's really good to ask those reasons when you're being told, oh, well, this course needs to be changed. Okay, well, what happens to the people who are in the middle of the course when that happens? They are in progress. They started it. They're just on question 5 of the exam. What is their experience? What do we want to have happen? Again, not a technical question so much, just a conceptual question. What is the learner experience when that happens? Has everybody signed off on this? Is everybody clear that we've got people who haven't taken it yet, people who are in the middle of taking it, and people who already took it? We need to serve up an experience for each of these audiences really clearly. We need to know how to support that. And we know that content is going to expire. We know that the course that we launched for Q1 of this year probably will make an update in Q1 of next year. We know that a lot of the content that we made a few years back that's really awesome animations that are all in this new technology called Flash, that might be a problem for some folks. Fortunately, there are new content development tools, new content development templates that allow you to do some great interactions and to do Flash-like activities with things that aren't Flash. But at some point, all that Flash stuff has to be swapped out. And on top of that, there's just mistakes that happen sometime. Well, there was the wrong phone number included in the support line. We just need to change that one bit of text. Well, we just need to swap out that image because the person that we have talking in our video in the intro, they don't work here anymore and no one talks about why. Let's just swap that video out. There's things that will happen and we need to be able to anticipate that there will be changes, there will be mistakes, and most importantly, to be able to support what happens with our learners and with our business stakeholders through that process. How does that happen? Who is it that validates that the content is correct in the first place, that it's been tested, that it's going to communicate properly to the LMS? Who validates that LMS functionality? Hopefully there's a chart somewhere in your organization, or maybe it's just in people's heads, but it's great when it's a chart that's tacked up in the cubicle about who goes and gets the research done when someone reports an issue. When the upper mucky mucks report an issue, that's something that's wrong in a report. How come it's saying that people are complete and that they are in the middle of training? How can this be? Maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Who is it that looks into that? Oh, they completed this earlier version of the course, but now they're in the updated version of the course, and we wanted them to take both, right? Oh. Who answers all those questions from management? And who fixes stuff when it breaks? Oh, well, they don't actually need to take this course again. I mean, all we changed was the phone number. So, I don't know, call that a minor update or something, but no, it's just fine. They're complete. We'll call them complete. Who makes that fix? Who makes that change? One thing to know about support is you'll never get your ducks in a row with all this stuff. There's always going to be stuff that is not anticipated, but the better we can anticipate the problems that are coming tomorrow, the better we can focus on the most important thing that most of us on this webinar are doing, making cool content, right? Making stuff that's engaging, making stuff that's relevant to the learner, doing the cool parts of actually creating behavior change in the organization. And so it's critically important that we learn to get along with the LMS. And more than that our content learns to get along with the LMS really well, really predictably, and that there will still be surprises. And who's going to deal with that? Who is it that's on point to deal with those tasks? Frontline for learners, frontline for managers, frontline for other content developers. If you're fortunate enough to have more than one person who's developing content in your organization. There is a handout which is downloadable for you guys in just below the chat, I believe. And this will help. This is basically a worksheet that does not have a copy of all of the slides that we've just been through here. If you'd like to watch the recording, this has been recorded. Just watch the recording. But it's a worksheet. It's a Mad Lib kind of format. Just fill in the blanks for what your content is designed to do, for what your system is designed to do and who supports it, at what hours, in which languages, all of that stuff. Scales up, scales down, use it as you see fit. Please take it and run with it. And at the end, there's a bunch of additional reading and references for those who are interested in more about learning management systems and how they're configured and stuff like that. But I really would like to get back to you guys now. We've got, another 12 or so minutes left. And I'd love to hear from you about any ideas that have come up for you in this webinar. Do you feel better equipped to make friends with your LMS? What would help that happen? What's the smallest, simplest, easiest way to test a bright new idea that you have? And if you still want to complain, take a number. It won't blow up, I promise. Happy to see anything in the chat. We'll be monitoring the questions here as well. What do you got?
So we do have a few questions on topics throughout the course. We'll just go through these, and some of them hopefully we'll be able to answer. Some we might not. This person says, I usually create a single SCORM package for an e-learning course, so the LMS sees one object for the course. Are there advantages to breaking the e-learning into several objects which are combined into one LMS course?
That's a great question, and there's not a cut and dry simple answer. It really depends on what it is that you need to report on the way out. So if you're creating multiple SCORM packages and stitching them together in, say, a learning path or curriculum, or some way of sequencing all of these things, that's a very popular thing to do these days, especially with video content, which is something that I specialize in. Rather than having the 1 hour long video, the big hour-and-a-half online course, why not just break it up into a bunch of 3 to 5 minute videos? Why not take that course and break it up into 10-minute modules? So there's the learner experience angle of it. Are we working with people like in a call center or something where like they're only going to have 10 minutes? They will not have an hour and a half. That's an argument for breaking it up into smaller bits. Do we want to be able to report to the people who are reviewing those completions? This person is 60% done. This person is 90% done with that entire thing. So they've watched, say, 50 of 60 minutes. Do you want to be able to say something like that? If so, breaking it up into smaller modules is arguably a good way to go. What is the smallest, simplest, easiest way to test that? Before you're making a decision for all of the content everywhere in your LMS, what's one project that you could test that with to make sure that the reporting really is valuable and it's not going to be more confusing to people, to make sure that it really does create more engagement by breaking it up into smaller pieces, and then it's not just a hassle. Jeez, I just want to get to the next thing. Why do I got to click 6 times? You can test this. Small, simple. Next
Excellent.
question.
Another question here. This person is curious. There's likely lots of content developers in this webinar. How likely is it that a content developer is the one that's interacting with the LMS in a way other than just uploading the file? And if the majority of our audience is content developers, how do they take this information and make it useful for them if that's their primary interaction with the LMS?
Yeah. If you are just a content developer and you don't even publish stuff to the LMS, like you just hand that over to an administrator and they upload it for you and then you go in and test that and all, like that's great, that's fine, that's a workable model. You need to know what questions to ask, and you need to work with that team to be able to predict what will happen when you make tweaks, when you make changes. And that team probably is really busy, but they want your information. They want what you make to go well. They want it to work. If you can work with them, make friends with your administrator team here, those that are working with the LMS. If you can give them what they need to not make so many mistake repairs because you were testing stuff, or just to let them know when you're going to be testing stuff, and to be able to try something new, again, on a small project or something that, what's that smallest, simplest, easiest way to test, you can work with them to create things that work better for the learners and that work better, especially for the people looking at the reports. Your learning management system team will thank you, because they're the ones that have to deal with every time something goes wrong, with every time somebody misunderstands a report. That's why I was asking the question, who is it that deals with this? You want to know where these support lines go, because the more intersections you can draw, the more you can be knowledgeable about that entire process, the better the entire process can work. Because if you're developing content, you're the one with the gold. You're the one that's got all of the stuff that people want, right? So that's what you're driving compliance towards. Wouldn't it be great if it was just really easy to report on that? You might need to work with some other folks to make that really easy. But you absolutely can ask questions. And you absolutely can request that, you know, it doesn't have to be a big sit-down meeting with everyone, you know, showing up and being serious and being defensive. It could just be as simple as grabbing lunch with somebody, you know, and seeing what their most common problems are with the content that you make, being able to tweak things and gradually improve that. I hope that answers your question.
Interestingly, there's another comment here. Carrie says, thanks for the presentation. My idea is to lock down security of the LMS so only admins who really need to access it can get in. Giving them too many options usually fuddles things up.
Yeah, that's a great thing to say. You've probably heard the expression, too many chefs in the kitchen, you know. When a lot of people have access to make fundamental changes to how the LMS works, then it makes it really difficult to support. It makes it really difficult to predict. It makes it really difficult to track down just what happened when. Well, I just uploaded that course. Well, who changed that setting? Well, that was supposed to have this certificate. Who changed that? You know, maybe you can track that down with some audit reports and stuff in your learning management system, maybe, but why create all that work? Yeah, locking down the security to as few hands as are necessary means that changes will be less frequent and they will be more thought through, because you have someone advocating for the stability of the platform. And when the platform is stable, everyone benefits, right? When the platform is stable, no one's happy. Content developers aren't happy. The learning management system team is tearing their hair out. The managers want to fire somebody. The learners are banging their heads against the computer. Like, making for a stable system makes for everybody being happy. So anything that you can do to create that simpler approach for what are those critical tasks that your learning management system is for in your organization, And maybe that's something like performance reviews. Maybe you're tracking stuff like that in your LMS. If that's critical, I'm not saying to turn things like that off, but is it really critical? Is it really adding value, or is it just eating up people's time? Because people's time costs the company money, and we want to get people spending time on the cool stuff, right? The engaging content, the stuff that will change their behavior, the stuff that will get us compliant. That's not the LMS. The LMS is just what gets people there and what restricts their access to make sure that they don't accidentally trip and fall into the wrong course, in the wrong sequence.
Another question, and the answer is going to depend on what LMS you're going for, but this person wants to know, what business metrics can LMSs track other than simple course completion?
Depends on what your LMS integrates with. So that's not a question that an LMS alone can answer, but there's more and more work going that way, especially with XAPI and stuff like that, to be able to take data that's already tracking performance for the learners and to be able to sync that up using a unique identifier, hopefully their login ID or something like that. Don't use people's emails, don't use people's names, but to be able to sync that up and report either in aggregate or in specific user by user metrics of what their performance is. Now, what systems you have that track that are going to be very different for every organization, and whether your LMS can track with that data or not, it's really a job that's beyond your LMS alone. The LMS is critical in being able to provide for that, but you start talking about integrating it with other systems. The world is definitely going that way. So the more you start asking those questions now and preparing your content now for that kind of utility, it doesn't matter whether we gave them 50 minutes of learning. It matters whether they do the thing that they're supposed to do or not. Are they measurably better at selling stuff if they're a salesperson? Those numbers are out there, and those salespeople know what they are. But it's different for different parts of the organization. So prepping your LMS to do that is probably more the job of the LMS team. It's probably or some external person coming in and helping configure that. But it's a great question, and the world is definitely going that way.
Now, we have loads more questions, but we are out of time, unfortunately. What we'll try to do is I will get, well, first of all, send your questions, more questions through tweets to Snap Synapse on Twitter. There you can see the handle there in the corner. Sam's ready to answer your questions that way. We'll also try to take a snapshot of some of the questions you guys have asked here and try to get those answered in our webinar recap that we post later in the week, and we'll try to make some of those available.
Yes, and in closing as well, I wanted to say if you just like hearing me talk and you want to hear me talk more, I will be speaking at the Learning Dev Camp, which is also in partnership with the eLearning Brothers. It's coming up real soon here. I actually took this last night. I think it's 68 days now or something. But I'll be one of the keynote speakers there talking about training, specifically content, when it succeeds and when we know, before we even make it, that it's going to fail. Honing that instructional design spidey sense that is tingling. And thanks everybody for joining this webinar. I look forward to seeing you on future ones in the future. Do feel free to reach out at any time at Snap Synapse, tweet to me, and I'll get back to you. I'm on LinkedIn and all the places. And hope to see you at ELBX and Learning Dev Camp.
Yep, ELBX is coming up June 11th. It's very, very close. And it runs back to back into Learning Dev Camp. Come to ELBX, have a great time at our first users conference, and then stick around and then hear Sam and other great presenters speak at Learning Dev Camp again. It's going to be great. Also, at one point in this presentation, Sam did share some screenshots of some of our new style templates. So if you want to see more of those style templates, give us a call, 801-796-2767. Send an email to info@elearningbrothers.com. Also, register for these conferences at elearningbrothers.com or learningdevcamp.com. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.